This is a Silver Reed SR10 from 1978. And this is a Logitech K380 I bought in 2018. They are decades apart, yet look oddly similar. So much so that you could pick almost any typewriter since the Remington No. 2 and start typing right away. In fact, I wrote the script for this video using this exact typewriter without much issue. It's a bit more tiring and cumbersome, but everything is mostly where you expect. That's not good news, though. Today, you'll discover 8 things keyboards inherited from typewriters that make no sense. Let's start with the most blatant one, the row-staggered layout. Why are the keys on keyboards not forming a perfect grid, but organized in rows that are staggered? Our fingers don't move diagonally, but vertically. This is due to a physical limitation of typewriters. Typewriters work with a very simple mechanism. You press a key that activates a lever, there is a stamp here with the letter, that stamp goes to a ribbon with ink and presses the ink in the paper. That is very simple, but it has one key limitation. A lever has to run from each key to the mechanism here. If I remove the cover, it becomes more obvious. You can see that each key has a lever that goes through here and then goes to the paper. So if all keys were arranged in perfect columns, all the levers would have to go through the same route and they would collide. By staggering them, you avoid collisions. The thing is that normal keyboards don't have that limitation. There is a circuit board underneath that you can arrange however you like. So why not have them arranged in columns? Like an ortholinear keyboard. In ortholinear keyboards, your fingers can move vertically and don't need to move diagonally, which is not something they like a lot. However, ortholinear keyboards have one big problem, is that in order to use them, you have to put your hands together, much more than on a normal keyboard. On a standard keyboard, since the keys are staggered, I can place my hands diagonally and move the fingers diagonally. In my left hand, if I were to follow the perfect touch typing technique, I would need to move my wrist or bend my fingers. That's why many people cheat and press some keys with a different finger because they move diagonally like this. So you would say this staggered layout makes sense, but this is due to another limitation inherited from typewriters, the one-slated design. There is nothing preventing modern keyboards to be split in half and turned inwards or split apart, so you can align your hands with your arms and do not have to bend your wrists like in this keyboard. Let me show you a few keyboards that do this. For example, this is the Kinesis Advantage. You can see the columnar layout and it's split in half, so your hands now are aligned with your forearms and you're not bending your wrists, and you can type with your fingers moving vertically and not diagonally. But you can also completely split the keyboard in half and then you will get something like the Dygma Defy. Now with a fully split keyboard, you can adjust it exactly how you want it, maybe closer together so your arms are aligned and your fingers move vertically, maybe wider apart, still your arms aligned so no bending your wrists and still moving your fingers vertically. In fact, there are some keyboards that have this split design or a split layout without the columnar layout and still keeping these row-staggered keys. That's because we are really used to the row-staggered layout and it's easier to adapt to those keyboards. Some examples include the Logitech K860 and their copycats, or the Dygma Race 2. Let's move now to one of my favorites, the return and backspace keys. Typewriters have backspace, but it's rarely used because once you've typed, you cannot delete. It's already ink on the paper. But backspace takes you one space back in case you want to try to correct something, or maybe put a little bit of correcting white there and then press the Ace key. But it's not something that you use frequently. Not as much as on computer keyboards where backspace actually deletes what you have written. Then there is return, which doesn't exist on typewriters, because return comes from carriage return key, which was introduced in electronic typewriters to emulate what you would actually do to create return, which is returning the carriage. This carriage return key was placed in one of the few spots that was left on the layout, which is the spot here between Backspace and Shift. So what's the problem? Backspace and return are used really frequently, and they are placed in a position where you have to almost move your hand to reach them. This is because in modern keyboards, we've introduced one new column for additional symbols that is not on typewriters. So Enter and Backspace have moved a whole column to the right, farther away from your hand. You can see that I have to stretch my pinky or move my whole hand. Not optimal. But where else could we put that? There is no space. Although now that I say space, let me get to the next point. Why is there a huge spacebar on modern keyboards? On typewriters, it makes total sense that there is a huge spacebar, because when you type on typewriters, your thumbs are not resting on the spacebar. You're actually floating your hands because you need to apply a lot of pressure to activate those levers. And when I need to press space, they cannot be too precise. I need a huge spacebar so I can press space confidently without having to look. But in normal keyboards, my thumb is resting on the spacebar. I can be very precise. I don't need a huge spacebar for both thumbs. If I were to split that key, I would have space for Backspace and return on my thumbs. Let's see some keyboards that do that. This is the UHK60, which, as you can see, has split the spacebar into 4 keys that I can use for space, special functions, modifiers, but you can remap that to whatever you want, like Backspace or return, because this keyboard is programmable and you can adjust what every key does. That is a common trend among split keyboards. They are not only split, but you can also program them. And you can go even further. The Dygma Race 2 or the UHK80 have 4 Thumbkeys on each side. So you can imagine the possibilities. You can not only have space on both sides and then maybe Backspace or Enter. You could also have Delete or any other keys. This is possible because once you're resting the thumbs here, they can be very precise and you don't need to look down to press the keys that you want. And you can take it even further. The Dygma Defy, for example, has 16 Thumbkeys, 8 on each side. This can seem overkill, but the reality is that each person has different thumb dexterity. Some people curl their thumbs outward and inward, and others downward. Some other people place their hands more slanted, and others more upright. And that changes the arc that the thumb describes. So having so many keys allows each different person to find at least 4 that they find comfortable. Personally, I think that thumb keys are probably one of the huge benefits of having a split keyboard, besides the keyboard being split. It frees up so much work from your pinky that once you start using them, you will never want to go back to a normal keyboard. All the time right there. Let's talk now about a feature that keyboards inherited from typewriter that I believe not many people think about. Positive tilt. Positive tilt is when the back of the keyboard is higher than the front. So there's an angle here that is positive. This comes from another physical constraint on typewriters. Just like with the Row-Staggered Layout, there is another staggering on the keyboard, this time vertically, which also allows for the levers to adequately reach the mechanism up here. If they weren't staggered like that, there would be collisions when you press the keys. Each key needs a space to go down. If there wasn't this vertical staggering, that space wouldn't be there. So if the O would be at the same height of the L, when you press the O, the keycap would hit the lever of the L. In electronic typewriters and early keyboards, it was more present and it has been toning down gradually. The tilt on this keyboard is nothing compared to the tilt on the typewriter. This positive tilt is also why many keyboards still offer positive tilt legs, like this one, so you can tilt your keyboard upward. This is not really great for ergonomics because the more you tilt the keyboard, the more you bend your wrists upward. Most ergonomic keyboards have a neutral tilt or even offer reverse tilting, like for example the Dygma keyboards. This is especially useful if you are really tall or sit really high, or if you're using a standing desk and want to make sure that your wrists are perfectly aligned with the keyboard. Now let's talk about something that I think would be a great conversation piece. Caps Lock. Why is Caps Lock called Caps Lock and is placed next to Shift? Well, because Caps Lock actually locks Shift, like physically. Shift on typewriters actually shifts the carriage upward, so when you press a key, instead of getting the lowercase, you get the uppercase. That's because the levers have two legends imprinted, one for the lowercase and one for the uppercase. When you type normally, you get the lowercase, and when you press Shift, you shift the carriage and then get the uppercase. What Caps Lock does is literally lock that shifted position. You can see that the keys remain pressed and the carriage remains lifted. Now when I type hello, everything is capitalized. If I want to get lowercase, I press Shift and that releases the Caps Lock. The thing is that Caps Lock is in a really premium position due to that physical need to lock Shift. But on a normal keyboard, there are no physical constraints. Caps Lock doesn't have to be there. It could be somewhere else, and we could use that key for something more useful. If you don't have a split keyboard with multiple thumb keys, you could always remap Caps Lock to something like Return, and Caps Lock is much closer. If your keyboard is not programmable, you can even do this on the software level with things like the Windows Layout Editor or Auto Hotkey, and for Mac, Carabiner or Kanata. And now that I've mentioned Shift and programmable keyboards, let's talk about that. As I explained, what Shift does is move the carriage up so you can activate the legends that are capitalized or symbols. So if I want the parentheses, I do Shift 5 and 6 in this keyboard, which has the Spanish layout. So you're limited to just 2 characters per key. In the case of the alpha keys, lowercase and uppercase, and in the case of the numbers, the number and a symbol, and the other keys just 2 symbols. But why are we keeping that limitation on normal keyboards? Let me explain. What if instead of one shift, we could have as many shifts as we wanted? So let's say Shift 1, Shift 2, Shift 3, and Shift 4. So depending on the shift that you press, each key would do a different thing. That way, you wouldn't need to keep symbols around the keyboard. You could press this Shift 2, and then your symbols would be here on the home row or all around. You could even have a Shift 3 or Shift 4, where your numbers are not in the number row, but here closer to your fingers. That is called layers on programmable keyboards, but they're just special customized shifts. And if you have multiple thumb keys, like with the Dygma Race 2, those special shifts are really easy to access. You can press one of the thumb keys to get your numbers and the arrows, or you can press this other one and get media keys, F keys, and whatnot. You can customize this to your liking with symbol layers, shortcut layers, or anything that you want, up to 9 special shift keys. And finally, let's talk about the thing that keyboards inherited from typewriters that makes the least sense. QWERTY. Chan, chan, chan. QWERTY receives its name for the 5 first letters on the top left, QWERTY. QWERTY was the layout on the first commercially successful typewriter, the Remington No. 1 from 1874. There were other layouts at the time, and there were proposals afterward, like the Dvorak or Colemac. But QWERTY was already spread so much that it was difficult to make this shift. Everybody would need to relearn the new layout. Think about hundreds of thousands or even millions of typists all around the world. Once again, the reason behind QWERTY lies in mechanical limitations. You see, if you press 2 keys which levers are next to each other, they will clash. So if you press QA in a fast succession, they would clash. So QWERTY was laid in a way that the most common bigrams in English, like TH or ER, were not next to each other, not on the layout, but on the levers themselves. That's the basic design principle for QWERTY. Some people say that it was designed to make people type slowly, but it's not exactly like that. It was all because of this mechanical limitation. Why, if that mechanical limitation is now gone, did we keep using QWERTY? Well, for the same reason. When electronic typewriters and normal keyboards were introduced, people already knew how to type QWERTY, so it made sense to keep that layout around. However, now it's easier than ever to switch. Before, you will need to buy a special typewriter with a different key disposition. But now, even if your keyboard says QWERTY, you can go to the input language on your computer and change that to whatever layout you want. The Dvorak, columnar. So it's super easy to try a new layout, and if you don't like it, ditch it away. Of course, that time to relearn a new layout would be a lot of time. I would recommend watching my videos on my journey to switch to Ngram and then back to QWERTY. This transition can be made a little bit easier with programmable keyboards because they let you customize the layout to your liking. For example, I'm now considering switching to columnar, and I want to make some adjustments to the layout to change the position of the ñ and the tilde. So these are the 8 things that keyboards have inherited from typewriters that make no sense. But since I like you so much, here's a bonus one. Once again, it all has to do with the physical limitations of the mechanical typewriter. This has to be one big slab that activates levers that then send ink to the paper. But once we move that to electronics, those limitations are no longer there. And as we explained, we could chop the keyboard in half. And that opens even more possibilities. You see, when we type on a normal keyboard, not only are our wrists slightly bent outwards, which is called wrist deviation, but we are also suffering from hand pronation. That means when you rotate your hands downward with your palms facing down to place them on the keyboard. When you do that, you cross the bones on your hands, the ulna and the radius, and that pinches the muscles and the veins on your wrists, leading to pain over time. How do you fix that? Well, you need to rotate your hands back and try to type like this, which you can do with a split ergonomic keyboard with tinting, like the Dygma Race 2 or the Dygma D5. As you can see, typing like this, my hands are no longer pronated, but they're more in a natural position, like grabbing a ball or like when you're walking or doing a handshake. Of course, this might be too much, so that's why our keyboards have different positions from 60 degrees down to just 5 and everything in between, like 20 degrees. This is because each person is different and we want to give you as many options as possible. Of course, these are not the only keyboards with tenting. There are others out there like the UHK80 or the Moonlander. If you want to learn more about other tenting solutions, check out this video. And now, the big question. If keyboards make no sense, why aren't we all typing on something like the Dygma D5? Well, it's a combination of 3 things. Computer keyboards weren't designed from scratch. There was a transition from typewriters to computers, with electronic typewriters that got ever so more complex, and eventually leading to the introduction of the computer and the keyboards, which wanted to make that transition easy. So they copied the layout from those electronic typewriters, which at the same time had copied the layout from the typewriter. The second is that transitioning to a split mechanical keyboard is not immediate. You have to retrain your muscle memory so you don't feel the benefits immediately. You might need some weeks of adaptation. And finally, there is the cost. Even though some people spend a lot of money on custom mechanical keyboards, most people just use the keyboard that came with a laptop, with a computer, or maybe a cheap keyboard that you can get for less than $100, sometimes even 20 or 30. Ergonomic mechanical keyboards are normally more expensive, starting at around $300 and even going up to $700 or $800. The combination of these 3 is what makes some people don't make the switch, but those who have made it will never, ever go back to a normal keyboard, because it really doesn't make sense. And now is where I would like to hear from you. Which one of these inherited features did you find the most surprising? Or which one is the one that blows your mind? Have you made the switch to an ergonomic keyboard? In that case, which one? I hope it's ours. As always, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get more videos like this one.